Okay, well, today is Friday and we're here at the Consensus Conference. This is, I guess, the largest Web3 conference in the world, per their email that they sent out this morning. Don't quote me on that, just them. And we have the pleasure of talking with Yat, founder of Animoca. This is an awesome follow-up to our conversation a couple weeks ago with Robbie, current CEO of Animoca. So Yat, what brings you to a conference like this?
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Maybe I would say it's maybe the biggest conference in the Americas, possibly, right?
Okay, maybe that's the correction.
Yeah, maybe that's a correction. Because if you look at some of the events in Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, or even Dubai, I mean, it's pretty big. But I think that's reflective of the market as well. Like meaning that so much of the Web3 attention and also the support from government that you see in Asia has given rise to an incredible growth there. But Consensus, by the way, is going to be next in Hong Kong in February next year. They've already announced that, so that's pretty exciting. And I guess, again, it's just a reflection of kind of where the market is currently shifting, in large part because of, I guess, some of the issues that America used to have, maybe still has, but maybe it could be past tense soon, who knows. But yeah, I mean, I'm here. It's one of the main events in the world, certainly for the US. We have portfolio companies. We have companies that are, connections that we have here as well. Obviously, we're also speaking. And part of what Animoca does is provide thought leadership and wants to help people basically think about the space in different ways, right? So, a lot of people talk about how to make money and how to invest and, all of that stuff that we have to do as well. But we also like to tell people about the deeper meaning behind Web3, what we're all here for, and remind people. And I think last year when the market was really bad, we had to remind people of the same things just to make sure that, they weren't running away from the industry, right? It was a different time. However, this year we find that we have to say certain variations of the similar thing to remind people that actually it's not just about how to make a quick buck, right? But actually to make ensure that there's something much more longer lasting, much more fundamental, right? So there's the same message, but sort of, let's say, have different meanings for different times. Because, there'll be always down and upswings anyway, but we just have to be sure about that. Right?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
I would fully agree with that. Absolutely, there has been a lot of swings. And one thing which has had swings over time has been Animoca itself. It's come a long way. It's been around for quite a while at this point. And
Yes.
the actual essence of it, I say, has changed over time. I don't know anyone better to ask than you about the mission when it started and the concept and how it's evolved to now.
I mean, Animoca started really in 2011 as a video game company, and in many ways it still is a game company, but the broader mission has changed a fair bit. Because what happened was that we discovered that video games was a medium in which we could expand this concept of digital property rights, which is really the mission of Animoca Brands. But that mission only became a possible goal for us after NFTs came to life, right? And our studio in Vancouver helped build CryptoKitties. Actually, they shared an office in Vancouver with another company called Axiom Zen that eventually launched Dapper Labs, and that's actually how we got involved with NFTs, and that's how we said, oh wow, what is this? This is really exciting. This is actually something where we can truly own our digital assets, and what could that mean? And for me, my personal journey on this is that I've always been in the video game industry in the early days, all the way back in the 80s, so totally dating myself.
Well, it's
and what's interesting there was that I bought my very first virtual item, I think it was either 89 or 1990, I forget now, in a multi-user dungeon game called Perilous Realms. Anyway, a long time ago. The main point was that there were people like me already back then, when it was really a fringe thing, that saw value in digital items. And someone earned it, and then, the way that we traded those items was we basically were communicating with each other over CompuServe or some version of that. I forget whether it's CompuServe or Genie. And then, or maybe even Delphi. And then we would then set a time to meet in this sort of, version of a, I guess, CD bar in this sort of text-based game. And then he would literally drop, because there was no way to give. So he'd literally drop the item for me to pick up so that I would own it, right? I mean, that was how primitive, but still, people were willing to do that. And I may have spent $20 on it, but of course, before that, I had to send $20 to him, which then took like 2 weeks to clear because it was a check, right? Like all that type of stuff that we didn't have PayPal, we didn't have online pay, none of that stuff. But that type of thing people wanted to do. Fast forward a little bit, then you had gold farming with like World of Warcraft, right? And then today with games like Apex or PUBG, people are carrying people for money so that they're able to sort of gain these special items that you can only earn, right? So this idea that we value our digital time and digital assets has always been there. We just couldn't find a way in which we could make this a reality. And blockchain was a way to do that. So we decided that, we're going to focus on that. Digital property rights is our theme, is our mission. and gaming was going to be the way in which we're going to achieve the first wave of that growth, but it doesn't end there, right? Which is why we've now done over 500 investments, not just in gaming, but in education, in culture, in L1, L2s, everything, to help grow and further the Web3 space.
It's beautifully put. And just to dig in a little bit further into the journey here, I find that most of the great companies have that pivotal moment where there was, and we always think back to this, right? That moment kind of changed the company. For Wolf Financial with Spaces, I remember the night I went in at like 1 a.m. in the morning, see the team testing Spaces and go, I want to be a beta tester for that and become the first beta tester. What was that moment for you, whether it was, we're in the basement with the dev team and we cracked something, or where it was just like everything started to form into place and we decided, let's go full speed and let's build this?
For us, I go back to the story I just shared. It was that sort of moment witnessing CryptoKitties and the fact that a studio was involved. And just to give you an example of the timing of how quick it happened, CryptoKitties launched in November of 2017. And by January of 2018, we announced publishing rights, distribution, and investment, essentially. Right? That's how quickly it happened. And after that, in quick succession, we ended up acquiring the Sandbox. We started making investments in OpenSea, in Wax, in Decentraland, and then Axie Infinity. And we just basically went whole hog into the ecosystem. After that, it was no turning back. It was like, this is the future. And it was interesting, of course, that everyone else disagreed with us about that being the future, because it wasn't the people who were most skeptical weren't actually people who were not from the industry. They're like, oh, CryptoKitties, that's cute. You could sell your digital assets. That's cute, right? It wasn't meaningful, so maybe they thought we were a little kooky, but they weren't critical. But the ones who were most critical were people from our industry, right? It was people who were in the Ethereum ecosystem were like, what are you doing with NFTs? Who wants those things? People were saying like it's non-fungible. Anyone can just make one. There's no scarcity, all that kind of stuff, right? Who cares about culture? We only care about trading volume. And by the way, it's creating all this extra gas, which is bad for trading. And by the way, that same thing happening with ordinals, inscriptions, and Bitcoin, right? The same arguments were happening. And we actually got a lot of resistance from the existing crypto users who thought it was nonsense. Also because, if you remember, Bitcoin was trading at $3,000. Ethereum at one point went below $100, right? They were all sort of reeling from that. And then here is a company talking about non-fungible tokens that trade less, are less liquid, and in some ways maybe even drawing liquidity arguably away from what they're trying to do, right? So there's all these sort of negatives at the time. But because we weren't from crypto, that's the other thing. We weren't like, we didn't get into the space because we were mining Bitcoin, right? That wasn't our aha moment. Our aha moment that we could own the digital items, with CryptoKitties and NFTs and ERC 721, that was our aha moment. And so we entered from a totally different angle. So we kind of missed the ICO wave. We kind of missed being burned from that scenario. Which was, I think, a positive. I think maybe we would have been a very different company if we had been in the space maybe even just a year or two earlier, because we would have probably witnessed something that would have been quite negative and would have taken a different type of baggage with us, right? So, and that allowed us to basically freely develop what eventually became concepts around the open metaverse and things like Sandbox and selling land and Bored Apes and all that type of stuff. All of them that are part of the Animoca family, but at the time, was a new construct. And I guess the rest is history, yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I was going to say, so we had, it's maybe a two-pronged question. When we spoke with Robbie, who's also with Animoca, he talked about one of the main ways you're able to distinguish between certain companies you do invest in and certain companies where you're like, I'm not exactly sure. And one of the things he talked about was a warm intro, being way ahead of the rest as far as like there's data, there's all these things you could look at, but a warm intro from somebody you trust is one of those big things. And you made some acquisitions, you hopped into some projects and companies, like you said, that were totally against the grain, and people from our industry, I remember all this, I was covering all this, I was doing a bunch of NFT streams and content during that time. And I remember Animoca was coming up every single time. They were buying into this company, they were looking at this. You kind of have a visionary's perspective here that's pretty unique. What's wondering, because of the amount of waves and the different metas that have kind of popped up, 3 months of this, there's a gaming wave, and then you've got like a Digi, I think it was the company that bought the Super Bowl ad, and there's all these waves of gaming, and you guys have kind of stuck in there since 2011, you said. Curious on how you're able to navigate those waves, what that looks like, especially because Hong Kong has a different type of economy, the US has a lot of the regulations coming in. Curious on how you navigate that, because there's so much difference between the West and the East. It's a bit of a two-pronged big question. Just want to see what you had thoughts on there.
Well, first, I would say that what guides us is essentially a kind of North Star, which is around digital property rights, and this concept that we believe that we're building in a shared network, which means to win in the space is to share. Which is very different from, I guess, the Web2 narrative, and which I'll go into a little bit later. But it's really important because that informs how we invest and what kind of companies we think of. So even when someone gives you a warm intro, that's obviously helpful. But actually, what's important is, do you believe in the same ethos as we do about what Web3 is? Mm-hmm. And you can see that between parties who are maybe thinking more zero-sum and saying, I want to be the biggest thing there is, that's fine. That could be your vision, and maybe a certain kind of investor will work with you. But our vision is that we believe that in Web3, essentially it's like a rising tide lifts all boats because of the permissionless nature of blockchain. You can't really have a monopoly. And if that's true, then the only way to really play in the space is to be broadly participating and helping grow, irrespective of whether you're an investor or not. So let's do a thought experiment. What happens if Solana was to go up 100x? Outside of everyone in Solana going, yay.
Yeah.
Is it just Solana that's winning? No. Every other token ecosystem will actually be lifted up as well. We see this with Ethereum, we see this with Bitcoin, right? So meaning that even if one of them wins or appears to be winning, actually the entire ecosystem is lifted because liquidity can travel from place to place. Opportunities can go everywhere. It's not permission. Whereas in Web2, if Facebook grows really large, great for Facebook. Nobody else cares. If Fortnite, has 10 times more users, great for Fortnite. Nobody else cares, right? So the networks don't grow in participation of the growth of the industry. But in Web3, because of the permissionless nature, they do grow, right? So imagine what happens if Ethereum goes to, $5,000 or $6,000. Even Solana or Cardano or Ton or any one of these other ecosystems, they too will win as a result of that, right? That's a fundamental belief in that. But there are people in the space, and we've seen them in the past, who don't think this way, right? So they look at Web3 and they look at it in forms of how do I extract from the network, right? And those are the people that we try to stay away from. Now, we don't always get it right, but the point is that we want to make sure that you believe in this ethos that when you're building for a higher purpose. That's basically growing the network and growing the ecosystem. And then that's something that we can back, right? That's kind of on that. In terms of navigating the space, again, it informs on a vision. So for instance, when the market was really bad, if our vision was about just making lots of money, which is the vision of some companies, right? Then 23 and 22 would have been a really tough year.
Very tough.
And we would probably should have, just by nature of what our direction would have been, exited. Yeah. Because there's probably better ways of making money, like let's go to AI as an example, right? Which is what we saw happen. A whole bunch of guys saying, hey, you know what? We can make more money investing in AI companies or doing stuff in AI. Let's just jump on that boat and let's do that. And that works for some people. But for us, it was about building this shared vision around the shared network, around basically digital property rights, and expanding that space. So it didn't matter to us whether there was a bump in the road, because ultimately for us, we hadn't yet gotten to the place where billions of people own their digital property, right? So therefore, our work wasn't done yet. And if we believe that to be the future, it doesn't matter if it's 10 years, 20 years down the road, then, this is just a bump in the road, right? And that's what I mean in terms of, the navigation of the space. And then things like Hong Kong and the US, when the US became more hostile, but Hong Kong became really friendly, and Asia generally, then we just pivoted our efforts into Asia. You didn't need to be a rocket scientist to know that, right? Right. And then part of our job, to evangelize the space, was just to tell people like in the US, hey, by the way, if you're not feeling so hot about where you are right now, did you take a look at Asia? Did you look at Dubai or Japan? And that's what they did. And then they came in and they said, oh my goodness. I mean, I don't know how many people that actually went to, say, Token 2049 in Singapore last year. And they all came back and said their eyes opened up, right? They were beaten up here, and then they came to Singapore, and they came back with energy, right? Because they were excited about that there's another part of the world that wasn't thinking this way, right? Because when you look at, right? So that's part of that. But again, it grows down to this mission, which is we want to build a world where everyone have digital property. We want to build this belief that when you're building in a shared network, everyone wins. And to do that, we have to make sure that people were motivated to do that. So promoting it, expanding it, investing in it is part of that, right? So it's not a strategy in terms of how do we do one thing or the other. It's more if you have a common vision where you want to go, then the paths start opening up for you one way or the other, right?
Definitely. Well, I know you guys had dipped your toes into some Ton stuff. You brought it up a second.
We didn't just dip. We went in pretty big.
Yeah, you dove in heavy.
We're the biggest validator for Ton.
Well, I'd love for you to kind of dive into that.
So one of the biggest challenges that Web3 has had, and I think one of the reasons why, even though it's growing very fast, could grow faster, is distribution vectors have actually been closed off. Right? If you make an app that supports NFTs, Apple won't allow it, Google won't allow it, Steam won't allow it, and they've just recently started opening up in the case of Apple. But you know what the rules are? The rules are you can have NFTs, but they can't have utility. So what's the point in having a gaming NFT when you can't use it, right? I mean, and you could, and the reason behind that is obviously to restrict the utility of NFTs and to basically not really sort of threaten the ecosystem that they're building, right? Which is always what happens, right? They're gatekeepers and they want to maintain that. But Ton is not like that, as in Telegram. Telegram has 800 million users. And again, we want to keep telling that story because most people in America use WhatsApp. So they don't know Telegram. So from their perspective, it's like, who cares? But I don't know. It's like when we talk about WeChat in China, it's like, who cares? 800 million people on WeChat. Did you know? It's like, oh, really? I had no idea, right? Same thing. So for Telegram, though, they're much more open. And with the Ton ecosystem, they've basically created the whole wallet infrastructure that allows people to basically build and compose essentially blockchain-related games, applications, but with a distribution vector that allows free virality. Right? In other words, the CAC is super low on Ton, on Telegram. Right? So for instance, Gamey, which is one of our casual gaming studios, now has 1.7 million daily active users in a Web3 game because of Telegram. Right? So we're going to get to hundreds of millions of users in Web3 because Telegram has opened up the doors. Just a few years ago, Telegram didn't even allow advertising. That's the reason why Telegram wasn't used as a commercial platform. But now with Ton, it's become the vector for that, right? And that's why. And again, why did we become a validator? Why we're focusing on that, and is partially to tell the story, to say, look, if you're building a Web3 game or Web3 product, you can still build on chain however you like. You can choose to use EigenLayer or Berachain as well, or build on Ethereum or Polygon, no problem. But if you want to have distribution, here's Telegram and Ton offering you that vector. We don't believe that there's a single chain future, right? It's going to be a multi-chain future. We're all going to interoperate and work together. The reason we work with companies like Layer Zero is precisely because we believe the future is multi-chain. And so we want to allow people to sort of, cross-bridge assets and so on, which create more network effects, which comes down to maybe the other thing that I think is important for people to understand and how we think about stuff. We think of tokens essentially as containers of network effects. If you own a token, you become an owner of the network effect. So not really an owner of an equity stake, like maybe that some TradFi people like to think, or necessarily just a utility that you can use inside the game. You get to own an effect and a value that the network generates, right? You don't buy into Ethereum because it generates a certain amount of gas. In fact, there's an inverse correlation where if you spend too much gas, it might actually hurt the network, and therefore the value of the token necessarily because of the fact that maybe less people use it, right? So there's a little bit of that dynamic that plays. But yet people want to own the token because they want to partake in the value and benefits of that network, right? So that's what that means. And so you're buying network effects. And in Web3, because of the permissionless nature, network effects amplify much, much faster because individuals get to own them, which comes down to a principle of digital property rights. Because you can't actually own your digital property unless you can own something, which in this case would be the token, which in another way would be to own the value of that network effect. Imagine if if any chain added 10 million new users, what would happen to the value of the chain, right? Yes, it would not just only be valuable. It's not valuable because of the holding pattern only. It would be valuable because more people would talk about it, more people would use it, more people would create utility for it, right? I mean, and that's actually what social networks are, right? What is Instagram? What is TikTok? They're networks. The only difference is who owns the network effect. The company does. But when you use Instagram, you bring your friends into it. You bring your network into it. You're bringing thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, whatever followers into the network. But who benefits? The companies do. You get nothing for it, right? Yeah. But in Web3, you do, right? Whether it's an NFT, by the way, which is also a container of a network effect, it's non-fungible and has different elements of it, or a fungible token. They're all ways in which we basically expand our network effects. So that's an important aspect of our thinking, because then that informs about how we invest, how we think about the industry, and how we look at collaboration and cross-pollination of the space.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, I hope Telegram is aggregating this clip right here. This is pure marketing.
Well, I work directly with Near Foundation for content and stuff with Near Protocol and Ilya, and he kind of turned me on to the idea of chain abstraction, account aggregation, bringing together all these different networks and chains all into one spot, but non-custodial. And they really liked that idea.
Yes.
And I heard a lot of more and more because I was doing a lot of stuff on Near Protocol, but then I started to hear it among other people. And then I saw Here Wallet, which is one of the main wallets on Near Protocol, bringing in the Telegram into it. And like you were saying, I wasn't big on Telegram. I was big into Discord. I was like, Telegram, like what? Why, man? I don't want to learn this new platform. I get into it. Now I fall in love with it. I don't have a choice, but now I fell in love with it. We're using it all the time to talk to people, and it brought in so many users, and they're starting to integrate wallets and games and stuff like you were saying into the Telegram. So curious on your thoughts on the chain abstraction vision, this account aggregation, bringing all these things into one spot. Didn't know if you had thoughts on that.
First, going to my earlier topic, I talk about network effects. Chain abstraction is a way to expand network effects. Right? The fact that I have an end user that is contained in a wallet that is abstracting the chain means actually I'm leveraging the networks of these multiple chains. This kind of abstraction isn't really possible in Web 2. I mean, there's no common interface where you can go into an application that can give you access to Facebook, Amazon, Google in one interface, or messengers. You can only do it in a scraping way. And guess what happens? If some application scrapes WhatsApp or some application scrapes WeChat, then the company will try to stop that by changing mechanisms around it because they don't want to lose the network effect to someone else, right? But in Web3, vampire attacks are basically part of the nature of Web3. In fact, I would say it's one of the important aspects of why value is created, because of the permissionless nature. So in Web3, because it's permissionless, nobody can stop you from abstracting or building on top. Nobody can stop you from moving liquidity from left to right, right? That's always part of that. Which is also the reason why the more isolated a chain is by design, actually, the less it can grow. It can only depend on its own network effects, right? And so when you think about multiplication of network effects, imagine, thought experiment, if Facebook and TikTok and X or Twitter actually had permissionless data structures where they could just merge together based on some person putting them together, what would happen? Those network effects wouldn't amplify by 10% or 20%. They would explode by 100, 200, 300x. That's the reason why we think in Web3, even though we have a lot less users, the value that the ecosystem has today, which is like $2.5 to $2.6 trillion, which is basically the market cap of Apple, right? If you think about it, right? Is
Slightly less.
yeah, well, maybe slightly less, but yeah, no, who's counting, right? Okay, right? Twice the market cap of, I think, Facebook, right? Maybe. But anyway, my point simply being, right, that when you look at these network effects that are generated with a much smaller user base, it's because these network effects can amplify. But if there was only one chain, right, then actually that wouldn't be possible the same way. Like, to me, I think it's important that people and communities can build things that are their own, right? Because if it's not their own, you don't have the same kinship and you don't have the same identity with it, right? So to me, even though there's tribalism, I think it's a positive thing because as people, we're not the same, right? I mean, I think in some ways when people try to impose culture, like America tried to impose culture to the rest of the world, you must believe in this vision, you must believe in freedom the way we think of freedom, or democracy in the way we think of democracy. And while freedom and democracy are broadly good things, people interpret them slightly differently. And, if that was true, then there would be one world, but there isn't. We have many, many countries. Even these countries have many societies and cultures within them that have different values and different systems. And that, to me, is essentially a parallel to chains, right? They're chain cultures that are different. But the fact that they can interoperate with each other, like the diversity that you have in America, to me, is your power, right? If you were all just the same people thinking the same way, America wouldn't be creative and innovative the way that it is right now. But you're all contained within one country. So I would say the parallel here is you have America, let's call it some kind of chain, but then within it, you have probably a million subchains that exist within each other that have ownership, that then compose and build and create value from them in itself, right? That's our model around that. And so going to, people building account abstraction, they make it easier for people to use it, that's fine, but they're also leveraging the network effects and growing from that. So we think account abstraction is great. And we think it's great that people are building bridges across all these different chains, which, by the way, was not a narrative in 2018, 2019, right? In 2018, 2019, everyone was talking about Ethereum killer, right? Yeah. And now everyone's talking about layer 2 interoperability, which we think is the right answer.
I made a video and I was like, Solana's not the killer, it's in your protocol. And then as I got deeper, I was like, that was not the right term. I shouldn't have put that there. Actually, the more I learned about it, it's funny.
Yeah.
First off, before I move us into the next question, I got to say I love your energy. This has been one of my favorite interviews that we've done. And every time that you answer the question, you first answer it, and then you give a very relatable metaphor as well, like you did with America there, that I think is going to really help our viewers as well. I want to get your thoughts real quick on something which is super near and dear to our hearts, and we've had the chance to bring Robbie into, which is spaces. And spaces have really been a huge part of the Web3 ecosystem. I think that's largely how they got popular, to be quite honest, with so many people coming in and just hosting these Dogecoin spaces, hosting everything else. They were just blowing up. Have you been able to participate in many, and what are your thoughts on them, especially as it relates to building Web3 community?
Well, I mean, I think first, love Spaces. I think it's great. It's got a few bugs here and there, but it's technology. But it's been a great way to sort of galvanize communities and bring them together as an open platform. But if you think about the granddaddy of Spaces, do you remember Clubhouse?
I do remember Clubhouse.
I mean, and Clubhouse was one of those early versions of that, and I think if I remember right, Twitter took inspiration from Clubhouse.
Inspiration is the
Yeah.
greatest form of flattery, right?
Exactly. It is, and actually innovated on top of that. And because they had a bigger user base and reach, we were able to grow that. But I would also argue that the short form nature of Twitter made Spaces the right format for it, because like Facebook and other platforms were like, oh, we should do like Clubhousey things, because they weren't looking at emulating Spaces, they were looking at emulating Clubhouse, and they all generally failed because the formats of how they interacted with were not ones that were compatible for a way in which you would then have these really event-driven moments. And for Twitter, it was some of the right mix, because the short form content mixed essentially with dialogue sort of felt like it was like adding a gap that community wanted, without losing the short form nature of what Twitter offered, which is unique to Twitter, versus say Facebook, which is a mixture of everything and was generally long form content. And as a result, I think that kind of Spaces experience or Clubhouse experience wasn't as important or valuable. So it is a very specific, I would say, Twitter/X thing, and very important for our community. And I would also totally agree that that, and before that, Discord was a place where a lot of people would have those chats, and it's really mostly migrated to Spaces because they were just able to broaden the audiences, because in Discord it was around joining that channel. It was a much more localized version of that, a more like private server approach, versus on Spaces if you want to reach the world. And then there's now Spaces where you have hundreds of thousands of people logging in, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome to see it continue to build. You also mentioned a couple of times now about having that mantra of it's not about the quick buck, it's about building long term. But to build long term, money does seem rather
You need to be
important.
sustainable, yes.
How do you view money? I ask this question a lot of people. People say a tool, an option, trust. I'm curious how you view it.
I view money as a social network. And there's value in the social network. And of course, there's elements around that to make it sustainable. But to me, it is social. So when we say social currency, to me, money is the ultimate form of social currency. Money is a reason why societies around the world can do business with strangers who don't know each other and can agree to have a transactional relationship. Right? Before technology, before the internet, before TCP/IP, we had money. Before, I would say, here's my cow, can I have a sheep, right? I mean, that was the way that we would barter and trade. Yeah, and well, maybe it was a golden sheep, I had no idea, right? But anyway, the point is that you would trade in that manner, and that was not very efficient. And also, you had to have trust. Is it a real sheep, or is that your cow? Or like, there's all these things that, like there's so many things that just was confusing and problematic, all these frictions that you would have. And then you had money, right? And they were first in very simple forms of, like pebbles. Some people used shells. Some communities in the early days were using like shells from the ocean as a way to, and beads, right? And then an authority came in and said, the Chinese actually, I think, were actually one of the first people to maybe invent that, was that here's a form of paper money that you could use, and that money was, backed up by us, but that meant that now a stranger could accept that value, someone I didn't know around the world, and I could transact with you, and that actually binded societies. If it wasn't for money, you couldn't expand trade and transaction and make the world the way that it is today. So to me, money is a social network.
It's the best answer that I've gotten, hands down. Yeah. It's much better. I'm going to be stealing that one. I'm using that when people ask me.
And by the way, on that parallel, think about tokens. Before tokens, people used to talk about tokens as currency, and it is a kind of a currency, but it's a social network. They bind communities. Meme coins, even as silly as they are basically social networks.
I think we probably have time for one more quick question each, because I know you do have a 2 p.m. I just want to know, we're both 25 years old, and we are building, and we're trying to really scale rapidly in this space.
Exciting age. I envy you guys.
You have a lot of experience on us. You've built something awesome. What do you recommend people that are 25 right now, especially those that are building in Web3? What are some of the things you're like, I wish I just had done this so much sooner? Because for me, I'm like, I started building an audience when I was, 22, 23. I'm like, if I just started 3 years sooner, I could add the next thing. But with much more perspective. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So first, I don't know that. So I don't have my view on things like I wish I did is kind of a view of a regret to say I wish I did this or that. I don't regret anything in the sense that I think I am only able to be what I am today because of all the issues that happened in the past, good and bad. So even the regrets, of which I'm sure everyone has many, are actually a sort of a lesson that got you to where you are today. And I'm very happy where I am today in terms of what I'm doing. I feel very privileged and blessed to be able to do the work that I do. Very few people in the world have an opportunity to have that kind of impact, I think, or be in a place where we can help shape a space. So I feel that's a privilege. And I think all the issues in the past were just lessons for me to get to the point where I am today and future things that might happen down the road. So the way I got there was I basically just followed things that I felt were right. So it wasn't just a gut. My general mantra since I was young was to try to build something with impact and purpose. Right? And that meant that no matter what I was doing, and some things we got wrong, right? Because we thought it would build purpose, but hey, right? There were lessons implied with that itself. These are things that when you're building with impact and purpose, you can wake up even when the world is really dark. Right? Like if you're thinking you're building something really important that has a purpose greater than your own, then you don't have a problem when it's 3 a.m. and you have to get on a call, or when the whole industry is sort of laughing at you, or when your friends are saying, you know what, you should get out of this, right? The conviction is higher because you know you're building for something bigger. If you're not building for something that's that meaningful, then it's very easy to abandon ship. And maybe you should, right? And that's not to say, it's not a character judgment that you abandon ship. It just means it's not that important for you, right? Because you need to be able to, you speak about, I have energy. I have energy because I love what I'm doing, right? If I didn't love what I was doing, then I couldn't be giving endless interviews and go to conferences and travel the way that I do as a result, right? It's because I believe that what I'm building has impact and is for purpose, and for a purpose much greater than our own, which is also why we can take long-term approaches and views on it. So I would recommend everyone to, and you won't always find it, and your impact and purpose will change, right? If you have a family, maybe your purpose in that period of time might be your family. And again, nothing wrong with that. Like my family, my children are older. My oldest is already working, so, I've been around the block. If this industry had grown the way that it did 15 years ago, I don't think I would be able to do what I'm doing today, because my priority, my purpose would have probably had to share much more about how I can help build my family. Maybe that would have been more important for me at that moment in time. And that was not wrong for me at that moment in time. And therefore, maybe I would have forgone these opportunities, but I would still be happy, and that would be important for me, right? So again, it's an individual question that you have to answer, but I would urge everyone to find that. And we love to invest in entrepreneurs that have found that.
Well, we love what we're doing, so I think we are definitely in that boat.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just real quick, I know we got to hop off in a couple minutes, but that's one of the things I loved about you. I remember I watched your first interview years ago. It was like a thumbnail. It was like you, and it was like a metaverse background. It was like blue. I forget, you were talking to two other people, and you would talk, and I was just like, wow, this guy's got, you would do the thought experiments, and you would just kind of talk, and I would just be like, wow, I'm like off in my own little world. So just first off, just loved to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Kind of a similar style question on the personal side. You picked the gaming world long time ago. You stuck with it, like you're saying, through thick and thin. Curious if there were any personal things that kind of contribute to that specifically. It's like a two-pronged question. I know we only got a couple of minutes, but
sure.
Anything that was specific towards gaming that created that conviction, and then also any personal milestones for the next 1 to 2 to 5 years that you have.
So first, I would say that there's a broad metaphor that we often use, which is life is a game, just badly designed for most of us, right?
That's pretty accurate right there.
And I would say, and my experience with school was a bad game. When I had children, I discovered what is grade A, grade B, what is a GPA of 3.0 or 2. It's a game.
Yeah.
It's a leveling system, right? And it's a way to try to sort of put you in a bucket or in a box of who you are. And because I've went through a phase where my children are all different. I have 3 children, and everyone is different. They have different skills. They're not the same. And yet we put them in a system that tells you have to be the same, right? So those were those experiences that sort of made me sort of rethink about the world around that. And I thought gaming and gamification is just what we do every day. Everything in life is a game, actually, in some form or fashion. But with gaming, which is very natural to us as humans, we can now actually take that to advance things. Gaming is the best tool, for instance, for storytelling. Like if you think about how many people learn about stuff through gaming in this current medium, whether it's like, my children can recount Pokemon cards and what happens in Roblox way better than any kind of history book can ever, right? That's because gaming are master storytellers. We used to have storytelling, by the way, through like maybe books or maybe radio or film. Those were the mediums of that generation. Gaming is that medium today. I started with gaming with Atari in the 80s. It was my first company I worked for. And so obviously I have a long root on that. So there was obviously the personal passion. It started with, hey, I love playing games, that's cool. But then later on I came to realize that gaming actually had the impact, the potential to make that change. And think about if there was no gaming. We wouldn't have NVIDIA. There wouldn't be GPUs.
Wow.
The reason why we have these fast processing GPUs is not because people said, oh, look at AI. It's because people wanted to play faster and better games,
Yeah.
which again comes down to another root, which is when humans think about innovation and new ideas, it's the whimsical, fun ones that then bring rise to the big ideas later on, that inspiration around that. It's because we love to play games that you have NVIDIA, AMD, crazy graphic cards, curved screens, funky keyboards, all this type of equipment, Xbox, PlayStation, all that stuff. And now when you think about the DeFi space, how much of that inspiration comes from game design, about gamifying the experiences to make it more fun? Because that's the other thing. I think as humans, we're tuned to do things that are fun, right? Our dopamine receptors go off on things that are exciting and entertaining. So we have to gamify experiences, right? Even when we're with our friends, whether it's poker or whether it's chess or whatever, we play things, it's that fun experience. Social is a fun thing. So gaming to me is a core thing around that. So we think of gaming as a tool around that. We don't think of gaming as purely just an industry. We think the whole world is going to be a game in one form or the other, and we can advance it. So for instance, we're doing a lot in education, which is a new space, right? Just like 2018, Web3 gaming was kind of nowhere. We think Web3 education will be that. But we're using our experiences in gaming, gamification, and how we sort of create, not just incentives, but motivation to do that. One of the biggest learning apps in the world, Duolingo, is basically a game, right?
I was going to mention that.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Wow. But this was an amazing interview.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed it. Thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much.
Thanks for having me.
Right on. This is Wolf Financial. Let's go.